So I first met Rick back when I was in seminary, back in Dallas. He showed up at the class that I was teaching Sunday mornings at our church. Him and his wife showed up, and it was immediately apparent that these are church people, like the type of people who grew up in church, have spent their whole lives in church. Their kids went to private Christian school. They showed up to every church event that we had, and they liked nerdy Bible classes like the ones that I taught. And so we got to know Rick and his wife, and we spent time with them over the next couple of years. We ate meals together. We saw them every Sunday. We just did life together. My wife even taught at the private Christian school where their kids attended. So we got to see them. And somewhere along the way, we began to notice that something wasn't quite right. I still remember that the night we were at their house, and there had been a conversation between Rick and his wife, and something about it just felt off. Like the way she was acting, the way he was speaking to her, like the whole thing just didn't pass the sniff test. So that week, I invited Rick to come meet me at Starbucks, and we're sitting there at Starbucks, and I just start pressing into it. Like something, it just doesn't feel right. Like, what's going on in your life right now? Like, what was that I saw between you and your wife? Like, what's happening? And with that, he came in like he was just weighed down. You could tell, carrying the weight of the world. And when I asked that, it's just like the floodgates opened up. And he started pouring out how he was just overwhelmed. He felt stuck. He felt like there was no way to dig his way out. Like his work expected everything from him. His wife expected everything from him. His kids needed him. He didn't feel like he could let anyone down. They could hardly afford their house, but his wife insisted that they live there, and they could hardly afford school, but they couldn't possibly send their kids to public school, and on and on and on for like a solid 30 minutes. It just poured out. And I sat there, and I didn't quite know what to say to him. He was completely overwhelmed with all the stuff, all the stress, all the things that he had to have and he had to do and he had to make happen in his life, all the things that he had stuffed into his life, and he didn't see any way out. And I didn't know what to say to him because his life was full of good things. Like every piece of it was good. He had a good job, and his kids went to not just a good, but a great school. And he lived in a good neighborhood, and they went to a good church. And he felt like he should be grateful and happy, like he should objectively think he had a good life, but for some reason, he wasn't grateful. He wasn't happy. He was anxious, and he was angry, and he was overwhelmed. Like he'd been going to church his whole life, and he knew the Bible through and through, but somehow none of that seemed to make a difference in his life. So one of my favorite invitations of Jesus is from Matthew chapter 11, the very end of the chapter, 28 and through 30. There's a paraphrase of it in the Message, and it reads like this. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Like I read that, and isn't that beautiful? Like, isn't that what you want? Like, do you hear this? Jesus, he doesn't want to put more on top of us. He isn't adding pressure to our lives. He isn't asking us to do something that is hard. He's inviting us into a new way of life. He's inviting us to find real rest, like the kind of rest that is not just about taking a break, but the rest that your soul needs. He's inviting us into the unforced rhythms of grace, to lay down our burdens, to experience life that is free and light. Here's my question. How do we get that? Like, how do we make sure that we don't end up like my friend Rick? How do we make sure that we don't just go to church for our whole lives and know the Bible through and through, and yet find ourselves just as overwhelmed and just as anxious and just as angry, and our marriage is just as broken as everyone else's? Like, how do we step into this new life that Jesus promised? How do we receive the invitation that he's offering to us? This month, we are talking about a series on the new life that is promised in the scriptures. So a few weeks ago, we practiced baptism, which is the symbol and the ceremony of this new life, of a new identity in Christ. And we talked about when you're baptized or even just giving your life to Christ by faith, when we come to him, we receive a new identity as children of God. And then we receive not just a new identity, but God promises to give us a new heart, to reach in, take our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh, that he's going to create new desires in us, that if we just trust him with our lives, he will change us from the inside out. Today, though, we're going to wrap up this series by looking at how our new relationship with Jesus comes with an invitation to a new way of doing life. And the invitation begins with these three words: walk with me. Today we're going to look at a number of passages, but there's only one word from the scriptures that I want you to wrestle with, I want you to meditate on, I want you to feel, and it's the word walk. So let's start today, and we're going to pick up Romans 6, where we were a few weeks ago for the first 2 weeks of this series. Romans chapter 6, starting in verse 1, is where we're going to start. If you were here a few weeks back, you'll recall that we picked up this very passage and we looked at the context and we said some people were deeply concerned about what they were hearing from the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was communicating this message, this good news or gospel, that you don't have to do anything to know God, to be in relationship with God, to be forgiven, to have a new identity, a new heart. You don't have to do anything. Jesus Christ did it all. If you will, by faith, just trust him. Just believe in him. God will do this in your life. But some people ask, because some people have always asked the question, why then would I change my life at all? We see it in chapter 6, verse 1. The Apostle Paul phrases it this way: what shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning that grace may increase? Like, if being accepted by God has nothing to do with how much I sin or how good I am or how bad I am, why not just sin and sin and sin? Like, why not just do whatever I want in life? Why would I change my life at all? And you might recall from a couple weeks ago, the Apostle Paul's answer is, you've been baptized. Look at verse 2 and following. It says, by no means. Those who have died we are those who have died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? Or don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life. So why not just sin? If we know that we're forgiven no matter what, if we know that we're accepted and loved no matter what because of Jesus, why would we change our lives? Why not sin as much as possible? And Paul's answer is, that's not who you are. That's not who you are. You're a different person. You're a child of God. You have a new identity. And this new identity, what I want to emphasize today, leads us to a new life. That when we accept our new identity, when we accept and experience the love of God in our lives, it works in our hearts. It changes how we live so that we may live a new life. Literally, that we too may walk in a newness of life. In the same way that Jesus, when he rose from the dead, had a new life in him, the resurrected life, when we identify with him by faith, we are invited to walk in a newness of life. Walk, that's the word. So when we experience the love of God, it changes the way we walk. This language that the Apostle Paul is using here is ancient. Even when he was writing this, it was ancient. For thousands of years, God's people have used this language of walking as a metaphor for life, that life is a journey. It's a path that you have to walk. So the Apostle Paul, when he's writing this in Romans chapter 6, he's writing in Greek, but he was a Hebrew scholar. He was a scholar of the Old Testament. That's the language, Hebrew's the language of the Old Testament. In Hebrew, the word for walk is halak. Halak, it means to walk. It literally means one foot after the other. But in the Hebrew language, and moving forward, it's much bigger than this. So you may think about it this way. If you were to go back into an ancient world before cars, before bicycles, before all of that, walking was not just a leisure activity. It's not just what you had to do to get from your car into the building. It was a necessity. Like imagine, like everywhere you go, you had to walk. When you went to get water at the village well, every day, you had to walk. When you went to work, to the market, to visit anyone, everywhere you go, you are walking. The average person would spend hours a day walking, so walking becomes a metaphor for just life. This is how you live. It's how you walk. We might say the word lifestyle or way of life, way of doing life. For the ancient Israelites, this wasn't just about lifestyle choices, though. It's about who you're called to be as the people of God. That we are called to walk a certain way. That our walk is to look like we are children of God. So if you've ever tried to read through the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and so on, you will discover that there are whole segments in there, especially in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that are devoted to these very particular laws, sometimes excruciating details. Things like Exodus 23, don't mix meat and dairy, don't eat cheeseburgers. Exodus 20, take 1 full day off a week. Exodus 20, don't want your neighbor's stuff. Leviticus 19, don't wear wool cotton blends. Leviticus 23, go on 3 long vacations a year to Jerusalem. Don't abuse your employees or your animals. Make sure you don't have any mildew in your house. Don't eat bacon. You know, those types of laws, they're smattered throughout those first 5 books of the Old Testament. When God invites the Israelites into a relationship with him, here's the point. He doesn't just invite them to accept a set of beliefs or feel something in their heart. He's not just saying, believe in your heart that you're children of God or have a relationship with me in your heart. He invites them into a whole new way of life that shapes what they fix for dinner and what they wear and how they spend their free time and what they do with their money and how they work and how they vacation, how they seek justice and how they seek reconciliation, how they mourn, how they celebrate, how they relate to one another, how they marry, how they raise their kids. Everything in their lives were to reflect their relationship with God. That when they were invited into a relationship with God, there was a very particular way of life they were called to live as his peculiar people, as a people set apart for God, as a people who've been shaped by the love of God. It was to affect every area of their life. Now, I want you to get the connection here. The Hebrew word for walking is halak, to walk. The Hebrew word for all of the Old Testament laws and traditions around those laws. So like what you wear and what you eat and where you go on vacation, all of that is called the halakha, literally the way. You walk the way. So what does walking have to do with Jewish laws and traditions? These laws and traditions are not just rules. They're not just something you believe in your heart. They're a way of life, a way of doing life with God. And this, the laws and traditions of God, can only be understood, can only be experienced by walking the path, by walking the way. So here's where some of our modern categories might break down. The very language of this text in Hebrew forms the conversation. So we call the Bible true. And that's good, right? But when we use the word, the Bible is true, that immediately puts in our mind the idea of like it's a fact book or it's a set of moral right and wrong type things. And that's true, but that is to kind of miss the point here. Of course, the Bible is full of facts and rules, but that's not fundamentally what it is. To think of it in the way that God speaks of it, the way the Hebrews thought of it, the way that Jesus speaks about it, is to say that it is the way, the halakha to God. And that is different than just being a fact book or being a moral rule book. It's a path to walk. It's fundamentally experiential and relational. It's not just something you know, but it's something you walk. So you can't master the Bible in a classroom. You have to walk it. You have to walk the path. So don't miss this. You can get your doctorate in theology, but unless you walk with God, unless you worship him, unless you pray, unless you step out in faith, unless you wrestle with your doubts, you will never truly know God. You know God by walking with him, period. So Jacob Neusner is one of the world's leading experts on rabbinic Judaism. So this is the stuff of ancient Judaism, basically from just around the time of Christ moving forward. And he gives this helpful summary of how ancient Jews, at least at the time of Christ, viewed this whole thing. So they would see Moses, the guy who introduced the Israelites to God and walked to the burning bush and all that. Moses comes down off Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of law in his hand, the 10 commandments, the one tablet, loving God. This is what it looks like to love God with all your heart, and the other's all about your neighbor, loving your neighbor as yourself. He comes down with these 2 tablets in his hand, and his face is literally glowing. He's been in the presence of God, and he's been transformed. He's reflecting the glory of God when he comes down. And what he's coming down with are not just a list of rules, not just a list of facts, but a way to do life with God, a way for people to walk. And he becomes a teacher, or the Hebrew word, rabbi. And then he takes his student, Joshua, who is a disciple. So the rabbi takes his disciple, and he doesn't just teach him what the facts he needs to learn, but he shows him the way to walk with God. And then Joshua begins radiating and reflecting the glory and life of God. And Joshua then becomes a teacher or rabbi to the elders of the tribes of Israel. And he teaches them how to walk with God until they begin to be transformed and begin to radiate. So it goes from rabbi to disciple, rabbi to disciple, rabbi to disciple. And that is how, from generation to generation, how people meet God. It's not through a list of facts. It's not just through a book. It's through learning to walk the way. Now, there's a few of you sitting there right now thinking, Paul, that is so great. And if I want to become an Orthodox Jew, that will be so helpful. But I'm a Christian. And Christians believe that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament, that we are set free from that. We no longer have to worry about the rules about food and clothes and annual feasts. That's old. We live in the New Testament. The old was that you can't eat bacon. Now we can eat bacon to the glory of God. So what does all this Hebrew halakha business have to do with me trying to follow Jesus? What does that have to do with me? My answer to that is, first, bravo. I'm so glad you're reading your Bible. It's absolutely true. Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament. He's the perfect fulfillment of loving God, loving people, of the 10 commandments. He is what it looks like to fulfill that. And you're right. We can now eat bacon and have shrimp and wear wool cotton blends to the glory of God. It's true. But have you ever noticed when Jesus, the rabbi, the teacher, shows up and he invites disciples, students, to follow him, when he invites them to come into a relationship with God, how does he invite them? We see in Matthew chapter 4:19, sees Peter and Andrew, these fishermen, they're working on their fishing stuff, and he comes up to them, and the words he uses are, "Follow me." Or Mark 1:17, "Follow me." Or Luke 5:27, "Follow me." Or John 1:43, "Follow me." He is a rabbi, and he invites them to follow, that is, to walk with me, to watch where I'm going, to see the path, the way that I'm fulfilling God's law, the way that I'm living out life, the way that I'm doing life, to walk with me, to step where I step, to follow me. That he is a rabbi inviting them on a way to follow God. So the Apostle Paul, before he became a follower of Jesus, he was trained as we said, he's an expert in Hebrew, an expert in Jewish law in particular. So when he describes what it means to be a Christian, what does he say? In Romans chapter 4, he talks about how being a child of God is not just being born from someone genealogically, ethnically from Abraham. It's not just that, because you can be a child of Abraham and not even believe in God. But those who are truly see Abraham as their father, who are they? There are those who walk in the footsteps of the faith. Those who halak, the halakah, who walk the way. So how do you know if you're actually a child of Abraham? You walk in the way of faith, the way Abraham did. And then in his letters to the early church, listen to how he describes the Christian life. Romans 6:4, we already talked about. You walk in a newness of life. Romans 8:4, we do not walk according to the flesh. That's not how we walk. Romans 13:13, let us walk properly. 2 Corinthians 5:17, walk by faith, not by sight. Galatians 5:16, walk by the Spirit. Ephesians 1, Colossians 1:10, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Ephesians 5:2, walk in love. Walk, halak, 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 halak. More than 35 times, the Apostle Paul describes the Christian life as a walk, a way of life, a way of living. Something that affects how you eat and sleep and work and vacation and what you do with your time and what you do with your money and how you relate to your spouse. It is a way of living. It is not just a set of beliefs, but it's how you live your life that is distinctly following a way of life that Jesus, our rabbi, set up for us. The earliest Christians, before they were ever called Christians, do you know what they were called? In Acts chapter 9, verse 2, they were called people who belonged to the way, the halakah. There are people who lived a certain way of life that Jesus set up for them. Not just a set of beliefs, but a way of life. For the earliest Christians, the Christian life was not just about believing a set of beliefs, though it was. But it was not just about loving God in your heart either. It was irreducibly and fundamentally a way of life. That internal transformation, that if you experienced the love of God, if you believed the gospel, if you knew your identity as a child of God, then it shaped the way you live. It shaped everything you do. Now, don't misunderstand me here. Doing life with God cannot be boiled down to a list of rules, rituals, practices. It is irreducibly personal here. So I'm not just saying in the way that Jews, you can be a good Jew and not believe anything so long as you do those practices. That's not what I'm saying. For the Christians, it's fundamentally not about the list of things we do and don't do. It's fundamentally about a person. For Christians, the way is not a list of rules or a list of what you wear and what you eat and how you work. For Christians, the way is Jesus. So in John chapter 14, Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross. And this rabbi says to his disciples, to his students, this teacher says to his students, I'm going on a journey. I'm going to my Father's house to prepare a room for you. And one of his disciples, Philip, is like, is he talking about Nazareth? Like, where is he going? Like, how are we supposed to get there? How are we supposed to know if we don't know where you're going? Like, how are we supposed to go there? Like, he's totally confused. And what does Jesus say to Philip? He says, Philip, I am the way. John 14, 6 and 7. I am the halakah. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Do you hear this? He's not saying that for Christians there is no law, no tradition, no way of doing life. He's saying he is the law, the tradition, the way of doing life. He is the halakah. He is the way to do life with God. He's inviting us, follow me. If you want to find the way to God, walk with me. Learn to live the way I live and work the way I work. I will teach you the unforced rhythms of grace. I will show you the way to the deep, rich fullness of life. I will teach you the way to find freedom, peace, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Like, he's not simply calling us to believe some truths about him or accept him in our heart. He's calling us to a way of life, to a halakah. And his way of life should form our way of life. It should form how we eat and shop and watch TV and commute and work and vacation and worship and dress and everything. We should serve as he served, and sacrifice as he sacrificed, and forgive as he forgave, and give as he gave, and speak as he spoke, and love as he loved. He is the way to find life with God right now and forever. So, after I had that little conversation with my friend Rick, things got really weird. He avoided me, and then he and his wife ended up leaving our church, going to another church where no one would ask them hard questions or pry into their lives. And then later on, my wife and our family ended up moving up here to Pennsylvania, and I lost track of them. And then a few years back, heard what had happened to their family. They ended up getting divorced. Had to move out of that wonderful neighborhood that they had. Their kids have ended up struggling deeply. And when I heard that, my mind went back to my conversation with Rick. And I thought, if I could go back in time and speak to Rick then and warn him about what was coming in his life, that because he would not let go of all of the good things in his life, he would lose them all. If I could go back and say something to him, what would I say to him? Like, what could possibly help him see that the way he was living life was not the way that Jesus had called him to? And is there anything I could say? Like, would he have listened? Because let me tell you, Rick knew. He knew the way of Jesus. He could have quoted chapter and verse, what it meant to follow Jesus. He knew that Jesus was inviting him to give things up in his life. He knew that the way of Jesus was not to be over busy, was not to own too much, was not stuffing your life with millions of things. He knew that the way of Jesus was a way of prayer, of deep relationships, of loving people sacrificially, especially those who are different than you. He knew the way. He knew all about it, but he didn't walk it. He didn't have the space in his mind or his heart or his finances or his schedule for Jesus. He knew everything about the way of Jesus and yet did not walk it. In church, that is my fear for us. Following Jesus is a lifelong journey, but it is not complicated. It's just following his invitation. It's taking your next step in this journey to become more like him, a person who loves God and loves other people. There are 4 basic questions we can answer pretty easily, I would say. What in your life, like think through your schedule, your work, your routines, your possessions, your spaces, your relationships, your technology, like all the aspects of your life. What in your life stirs your love for God, like makes you love him more, desire him more, spend more time? What deepens your relationship with him? Do that. What steals and diminishes and blocks your love for God? What makes you more apathetic about God? What increases your doubts? Do less of that. What in your life grows your love for others, especially those who aren't like you? Do that. And what makes you more apathetic, more insensitive, more hateful towards others? Don't do that. Stop that. There's 4 things. What stirs your love for God or steals your love for God? What stirs your love for others or what steals your love for other people? It's not that complicated. I'm pretty sure if I sit you down with a cup of coffee, a pen, and a piece of paper, I think in about 10 to 15 minutes, you can come up with a pretty lengthy list to put under each one of those points. The hard part is not figuring out what it means to follow Jesus. Most of us already know. The hard part is actually choosing to do it. The hard part is actually trusting him when he says his way is better, that his way leads to freedom and to life and to peace and to God. And if we go our way, it's not going to lead to life and peace and God. So rather than finish this message with a list of things for you to do, add more burdens to you, I'm going to leave you with a couple questions, and these are real questions that I can't answer, and questions that I don't necessarily want you to answer to me. This is between you and God and maybe a trusted friend. I just want you and God and maybe someone close to your life to be clear on these answers. So here's my questions for you, just to leave this with you as we part this time. To the extent that you are aware of areas of your life that aren't working for you, areas of your life that are not healthy, that something's wrong, like something's not quite right in those areas. To the extent that you're aware of those, what will it take for you to choose to follow Jesus in those areas, to let go of control of those areas? What warning signs might there be in your life right now that if you keep heading the way you're going to end up like Rick? You're going to end up losing it all anyways. And last, what is it going to take for you to choose to do it Jesus' way and actually make those changes in your life? Those are questions I can't answer for you. But church, those are questions that we have to answer. Otherwise, they're going to be answered for us. I love you, and I want to seek Jesus with you. And there's a better way to do life. Church, I want to live that way. And I want us to be a church that models what that looks like in our world that desperately needs to see that. See you next week.